Hello and welcome to Umbral Dread. Before we begin, take a moment to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoy slow, unsettling stories that quietly draw you deeper into the shadows, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now get comfortable, let your body grow still, and allow the outside world to gently fade into silence. Tonight, something lingers in the dark, waiting for you. So close your eyes. Listen carefully. And let yourself drift into the depths of Umbral Dread. Story 1. I need to start by saying something I don't say out loud very often. I have not been a good person. I've tried to become one, and I'm still trying, but I don't want to tell this story like I'm the hero in it. I'm not. I did real harm to people when I was younger, and I earned a lot of the loneliness I used to blame on everyone else. I got pulled into the worst corners of the internet when I was a teenager, the kind of places where pain gets turned into ideology. I was 16 when I started stalking. My first girlfriend left me for another guy, and I handled it in the most pathetic, poisonous way possible. Instead of feeling the hurt and moving on, I went looking for other people who were angry. I found forums full of men who talked like women were a problem to solve or punish. I was young, insecure, and desperate to feel powerful, and those spaces handed me a script. At first, I told myself it was just getting back at her, like that was normal. Then, it became a habit. Then, it became a way of thinking. I started collecting fear and control like they were proof I mattered. I rushed into relationships because being alone felt like dying. I got attached fast and hard, and then I tried to lock the other person in place with suspicion. I convinced myself every partner was cheating, hiding something, laughing at me behind my back. I didn't trust anyone, and I hated them for the distrust I created. I'm not going to explain how I did what I did back then. I'm not going to list methods or tricks. I won't put that in the world for someone else to copy. All I'll say is that I watched people who trusted me, and I did it secretly. I violated privacy. I justified it. I called it protecting myself. It wasn't protection. It was control. When I was 24, it almost landed me in jail. A restraining order was filed. I was required to attend anger management and therapy. It was the first time consequences showed up in a way I couldn't talk my way out of. I know there are people who would say I got off easy, and they might be right. But the truth is, those consequences finally forced me to face who I'd become. My therapist was an older woman. I'll call her Miss Price. She wasn't soft with me, but she wasn't cruel either. She did something that felt impossible at the time. She treated me like a person, while still holding me accountable for the way I'd treated other people. She heard every ugly thing I thought, every twisted belief I'd absorbed, every excuse I wanted to hide behind, and she kept pulling me back to the same question. What do you do? Next? Over the years, she became a kind of motherly figure to me, which sounds dramatic, but it's true. I never had the kind of relationship with my own parents that let me mess up and come back. They hated what I had become, and they didn't want to be part of my recovery. I can't fully blame them. It still hurt. By the time I was 26, I'd made enough progress that therapy became less frequent, but I never fully let Miss Price go. We stayed in contact through email and occasional messages. She was a steady point, a reminder that I could change, and that change was work, not a feeling. 3 years ago, when I was 27, I met Emma. Even writing her name makes my stomach tighten. She looked like a person you'd want to be around. She had this bright, bubbly way of talking, like she carried warmth with her. She wore muted green and red sweaters and scarves, the kind of colors that make someone look cozy even in harsh winter light. Her hair was silky brown and long, and she wore round glasses that completed the whole soft, safe, bookish vibe. She looked like she belonged in a coffee shop writing a novel, which was basically accurate. I struck up a conversation with her because I thought, maybe I can do this right now. Maybe I'm not that man anymore. Maybe I can be normal. From the first interaction, I felt something electric in the air. It's embarrassing to admit how fast I latched onto her, but I did. She was easy to talk to. She laughed at my jokes. She asked questions. She made me feel like I existed. And even though I approached her suddenly, she didn't pull back. She was friendly, open. After an impulsive first date, we followed each other on social media and exchanged numbers. The attraction was mutual. It wasn't one-sided fantasy. She wanted me too. We went out again the next week, and then again, and then it became a rhythm. Emma was a light fantasy writer. She had a blog where she posted short stories, and she had a small following. She was working on a novel. When she showed me her writing, I felt like I was being invited into a part of her she could have kept private. Her worlds were vivid. Her characters felt alive. That talent made me fall harder. But I was determined not to rush. That was one thing I'd learned. Rushing is where I lose myself. I wanted us to really know each other before calling it a relationship. After 5 months, Emma was the one who told me she loved me. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Not because it was bad, but because it was so good it scared me. I knew I couldn't accept her love without telling her what I'd done in the past. I couldn't build something honest on top of a lie, not after everything. So I told her. I told her about stalking, about control, about how close I came to jail, about therapy. I told her I wasn't trying to excuse any of it. I told her I was trying to be better, and I didn't want to drag her into something unsafe. Emma listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't flinch away. She asked questions that were calm and thoughtful. Then she gave me a chance. I don't have words for what that meant to me. She felt like proof that I could be redeemed. I promised myself I would be the best boyfriend I could be. Because if anyone deserves safety, it was her. And I tried. I really did. The urge to check never vanished completely. Sometimes I'd see her phone on the couch and my brain would whisper, "Look." Sometimes I'd notice her laughing at a message and my chest would tighten. Sometimes I'd want to scroll through her followers and convince myself there wasn't some guy waiting in the shadows. But I stopped myself. Every time. I told her when I was struggling, not in a way that blamed her, but in a way that admitted what was happening inside me. Emma did something I wasn't used to. She responded with openness instead of defensiveness. Sometimes she'd show me her messages on her own, not because she owed me, but because she wanted to calm the storm in my head. It wasn't healthy for her to have to do that, and I knew it. But her kindness made it harder for my paranoia to grow. For the first time in my life, I started to feel what trust could be like. I considered Emma and Miss Price to be my saviors, honestly. One helped me become a better man. The other helped me believe that being a better man could lead to a better life. Then, everything changed. About a year and a half into our relationship, during winter, Emma's parents invited us to a trip in the mountains. Emma was an only child and close to her parents. They were kind people, the kind of parents who offer you a plate of food and mean it. Being around them made something in me relax, like I had a family again for a moment. I couldn't go. Work got busy right before Christmas, and I told myself I'd make it up to Emma later. That's a sentence I hate now, because later is not something you get to rely on. The day before New Year's Eve, I got a call from a man who introduced himself as Hank. one of Emma's uncles. He told me I was listed as her emergency contact. He said there had been an accident. He described it in a way that still feels unreal. A bear got into their cabin and things went bad. Her parents were killed. Emma survived with minor injuries, but she was traumatized. Damn unfortunate to come across a bear during wintertime, he said, and his voice tried to sound solemn. But it felt off to me even then, like he was reading a line he'd practiced. I didn't question it. I just went numb and drove to the hospital. Emma was there on the bed, but she didn't look like Emma. Bandages wrapped her left arm and upper thigh, dried blood in spots. The injuries didn't look life-threatening, but her face was empty. Not sad, not angry. Empty, like the person behind her eyes had stepped away. A nurse told me she was in shock, and it could take weeks or months. When I spoke to her, she answered in a monotone voice. Her eyes looked dead. Not just tired. Dead. Then the memory loss became clear. She didn't remember chunks of her life. At first, I thought it was temporary confusion. Then it became obvious she wasn't just disoriented. Something had been wiped clean. I moved her into my place so I could care for her. It was uncomfortable, not because I didn't want to help, but because it felt like living with a stranger who wore my girlfriend's face. She had to relearn simple things. Eating slowly instead of stuffing food like she didn't recognize hunger cues. Basic cooking. Even little habits she used to have, like humming while she made tea, were gone. Doctors suggested stress, maybe a head injury that wasn't caught. Scans showed nothing. What terrified me was that her mind was still sharp. She learned quickly, almost too quickly. It was like she was building a new Emma on top of an empty template. 6 months later, she functioned again. She could do everything. Sometimes she did things more efficiently than before, like she'd optimized herself. But her personality shifted. The bubbly kindness was gone. In its place was something serious, flat, and uncaring. She didn't hug much. She didn't kiss. I didn't push intimacy. I slept on the couch while she slept in my bed, because it felt wrong to touch her when she didn't remember loving me. When she started asking about our relationship, I told her honestly she could decide what she wanted once she processed her feelings. It hurt, but I meant it. I didn't want to trap her. Then she started showing affection in ways that didn't make sense. She would bite me. At first it was playful, almost flirtatious. Then it got harder. She would lick my arms and neck, slow and strange, as if she was tasting me. Still, she avoided hugs, avoided kisses, avoided anything that looked like normal closeness. I started waking up at night and finding her standing over me, staring. At first, I'd jerk awake in panic, thinking someone had broken into the apartment. Then I'd realize it was her and try to calm down. When I asked what she was doing, she'd say she couldn't sleep, and watching me helped her sleep. She said it in a neutral voice, like it was a normal habit. I told myself it was trauma. I told myself it was grief. I told myself she needed time. At some point, we had her use one of my emails on my computer because her laptop was destroyed during the attack, and we needed her to be able to access basic things. Later, even when she was better, she kept using that email on my PC out of habit. She never seemed interested in managing multiple accounts. She used whatever device was in front of her, the way it was set up. A few months ago, I was searching my browser history for a site I'd forgotten. The history was mixed, mine and hers, and most of it was normal enough. Random videos, random shopping, random articles. Then I saw a search that made my skin tighten. Jobs that work with fresh corpses. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was writing again. Maybe she'd fallen into true crime the way a lot of people do. Her interests had shifted since the accident. She'd developed a taste for horror. It could have been nothing, but once I saw it, I couldn't let it go. I scrolled further back. True crime, urban legends, close encounters content, reports about the incident in the mountains, old articles about her parents' deaths, updates, even minor ones. Over and over, like she was studying her own trauma as if it belonged to someone else. Then I found searches that weren't just creepy. They were wrong. Human rituals, how to show emotions, how to live with others, common roadkill sites. With our town, is it socially acceptable to eat another human? I sat staring at the screen for a long time, feeling cold spread through my chest. My mind tried to label it as mental illness, trauma, a breakdown, some kind of obsessive curiosity. But it didn't feel like curiosity. It felt like instruction, like someone learning how to wear a life. After that, I started watching Emma more closely. Not out of jealousy, not out of control, out of fear. She started helping more around the house. She refused to cook, but she watched me cook. She watched me in a way that didn't feel affectionate. It felt like observation. One day, I cut my finger while chopping vegetables. Before I could react, Emma grabbed my hand and put the cut in her mouth. She sucked the blood like it was instinct. She said she just wanted to help. I laughed it off because laughing was easier than panic, but after that I became careful with knives for a different reason. The look in her eyes started to bother me. Calm on the surface, but something behind it that felt hungry and patient. I did something I swore I'd never do again. I installed cameras. I won't describe how or where. I'm not handing anyone a guide, but I watched the footage and realized her night visits weren't occasional. They were every night. I saw her stand at the window and watch me leave. She'd peek through the blinds until my car was gone. Then she'd turn away and spend the day at my computer watching videos, reading, not moving much. That blank expression would return, and it would stay there until I came home. Eventually, she started leaving the house more. She'd go get groceries while I was at work, texting me to ask if I wanted anything, like a normal partner. It didn't feel normal anymore, so I followed her one day to clear my doubts. I lied and told her I was going to work. I rented a car so she wouldn't recognize mine. I tracked where she went using something I'm not proud of, and I sat far away with binoculars like I used to as a younger, worse man. I told myself this time it was different. This time, I wasn't trying to control her. I was trying to survive her. She did normal errands. Mall. Stores. Nothing strange. Then she went home, and that's when I saw what broke my brain. I watched through the live feed from my phone. She unpacked groceries neatly. Then she left a block of raw meat on the counter. She filled a mop bucket. She took off all her clothes. She threw them onto the couch. Then she picked up the meat and started eating it, raw. The blood ran down her mouth and onto her chest and stomach. She made low noises as she chewed, and the sound coming through the phone speakers made me feel sick. It didn't look like a person doing something gross for shock value. It looked like an animal eating because it had to. She ate an impossible amount, the whole chunk. 4 pounds? Maybe more. I couldn't tell exactly, but it was far beyond what a human should eat in one sitting. When it was gone, she mopped the floor, wiped herself with napkins, flushed them, and took a shower. Clean. Gone. No evidence. If I hadn't been watching, I would have never known. That night I came home pretending I'd worked. She didn't ask questions. She acted calm. We existed in the same space, like normal. I hid a kitchen knife under my pillow before sleeping. I hated myself for it, but I did it anyway. In the middle of the night, I heard the bedroom door open. I pretended to be asleep and watched her through barely open eyes. She stood in front of the couch, moonlight on her face, my face in shadow. and I finally understood the look in her eyes. It was hunger, not metaphorical hunger, not emotional need, a primal, ravenous hunger. I was prey. She stood there for what felt like hours. Then she left. My whole body shook, and once I felt the danger had passed, I fell asleep like I'd been drugged. I woke up to pain so sudden my vision flashed white. Emma was kneeling over me, biting my left arm. When I pulled back, she tore off a chunk of skin like it was nothing. "What is wrong with you?" I yelled, grabbing the knife and pointing it at her, trying to get distance. Her voice came out desperate and wrong. "I'm sorry," she said. "It's just your fear. It makes me even hungrier." I moved too fast, tried to flip on the couch, and the couch tipped. The knife flew from my hand and landed on the floor between me and the front door. She leaped at me and bit into my calf through my pants. I felt teeth sink in like needles, and when she ripped away, it tore flesh. I kicked at her awkwardly and crawled toward the knife. She struggled with cloth stuck in her teeth, spitting like an animal. That gave me one chance. I grabbed the knife and scrambled to unlock the front door. The next part is a blur. Me falling out into the hallway, slamming the door, running outside half-dressed, blood soaking my leg, her chasing behind me. Somewhere during that run, I lost consciousness. I woke up days later in a hospital bed, bandages on my calf and wrist, and also on my stomach. A doctor told me I needed surgery to repair damage. 2 officers waited to take my statement. My phone survived, cracked, but working. I showed them footage. I told them she'd been acting stranger since the mountain bear incident. I didn't mention any paranormal theories. I kept it clinical. Behavior changes, memory loss, violence, raw meat. Anything that would make them take it seriously without laughing. Later, I learned what happened while I was unconscious. A truck full of college guys came down the road late at night and found Emma in the headlights. She was bent over me, her teeth in my side. They thought she was a junkie at first. Then they realized what she was doing. They had weapons. They fired warning shots. The headlights startled her, and she ran into the woods like something that didn't care about human rules. They called 911. That's why I'm alive. That was 2 months ago. Afterward, government officials came to my home and confiscated my cameras and electronics. I didn't fight them. I was angry, yes, because that footage was proof. But they treated it like evidence and told me I wouldn't keep it. They advised me to change my locks and get a weapon just in case. They said there should be no further issues. The public story was that Emma had a mental breakdown, attacked me, and fled before police arrived. She hasn't been found since. In the 2 months since, 9 people have gone missing. The first 5 were homeless. That meant the police response was quieter, slower, not urgent the way it should be. 2 weeks ago, a cargo worker, a nurse, and a teacher went missing as well. That finally made the public pay attention. I kept telling myself it could be coincidence. The world is full of unrelated tragedies. But something in my body doesn't believe in coincidence anymore. Yesterday, I saw the newest victim on the news. Miss Price, the therapist who helped me become someone I could live with. The only person who looked at me at my worst and still believed I could change. Now she's gone. I'm alone again, and I don't know if this is punishment for what I used to be. I don't know if I was given a taste of a perfect life just to have it ripped away, or if something older and uglier than human cruelty has moved into my world and decided to use me. I only know this. If someone you love survives something terrible, and afterward they come back changed, truly changed, like they're learning how to be human from scratch. Be careful. They might not be your loved one anymore. Story 2. For context, I only have one sibling, my younger sister Lily. She's 3 years younger than me, and we've always been close in that easy, normal way. We never had that constant fighting thing some siblings have. We like a lot of the same music. We'll watch the same shows and quote the same lines at each other. She'll steal my snacks, I'll steal her charger, and we both act like it's war, even though we're laughing the whole time. Living with Lily has always felt familiar, safe. That's what makes this so hard to explain, because the way it started was small. If it had started with something obviously scary, I think I would have reacted faster. I think my brain would have said, this is serious. But it didn't start that way. It started like normal sibling stuff, like petty stealing and annoying habits. And I think that's why I didn't stop it when it was still just manageable. It was about 2.5 weeks ago, after school. I came home, dropped my backpack by the stairs, and went straight up to my room because I had an essay due. I remember the day clearly because I was already stressed. The essay was one of those assignments that shouldn't be hard, but the teacher wanted a certain format, and I knew I'd lose points if I didn't hit the right structure. I was in that mood where you don't want any interruptions because you feel like one interruption will knock you off the thin thread of focus you're hanging from. When I opened my bedroom door, Lily was on my bed. That alone wasn't shocking. Lily has always done that. She'll wander into my room and sit on my bed like it's hers, because, in her mind, everything in our house is shared unless someone makes a big deal about it. Most of the time, I don't care. My room is my room, but it's also just a room. She's my sister. But she wasn't watching something on her phone. She wasn't drawing. She was reading, and not one of her own books. She was holding my middle school yearbook. I stopped in the doorway for a second because it was such a specific thing to be reading. I hadn't touched that yearbook in years. It was tucked on the bottom shelf of my closet with other random school junk I never look at unless I'm cleaning. And Lily isn't the kind of person who gets nostalgic. She's curious, sure, but this wasn't curiosity about the world. This was curiosity about me. Then I noticed something else. She was wearing one of my favorite shirts. I'd been looking for it that morning. It's not a designer shirt or anything. It's just one of those shirts that fits perfectly and feels comfortable and makes you feel like yourself. I'd checked my laundry basket, checked the dryer, checked the chair in my room where I throw clothes, and it wasn't there. I assumed it had gotten mixed into a load I hadn't put away yet. But now, Lily was wearing it, sitting on my bed, holding my yearbook open like she belonged there. Lily, I said, trying to keep my voice calm because I didn't want to start a fight the second I got home. Where did you find that shirt? She looked up at me slowly. She didn't answer. She just smiled. Not a guilty smile, not a you caught me smile, just a plain, quiet smile, like she was amused by something I couldn't see. Then she dropped her eyes back to the yearbook and kept reading as if I hadn't spoken. I stepped closer. Lily, seriously, I was looking for that. She turned a page. I asked again, louder, and she stood up without a word. She walked past me, close enough that I could smell her shampoo, and left my room like she was bored. No explanation. No, I borrowed it. No, Mom gave it to me. No, I found it on the couch. Nothing. I stood there staring at the open yearbook on my bed. When I picked it up, I noticed the page with my picture had been folded over, dog-eared, like someone had marked it on purpose. It wasn't a messy fold either. It was neat, pressed down firmly, like she wanted to be able to find that page again easily. My middle school photo isn't special. It's awkward, like everyone's. Bad hair, weird smile, braces I hated. I felt a strange heat of embarrassment just seeing it, like I'd been caught with a diary open. I told myself Lily was being weird. That was all. Kids get weird. Younger siblings get curious. Maybe she was showing a friend my picture. Maybe she was laughing at how I looked. Maybe she wanted to compare her face to mine. Normal sibling stuff, even if it was annoying. For a few days after that, everything went back to normal. Lily and I watched TV together. We ate dinner at the same table and argued about dumb stuff. She complained about school. I complained about homework. I almost forgot the yearbook moment. Then I started noticing my clothes in her room. At first, it was one or two things. A hoodie, socks, a pair of jeans I thought I'd lost. I told myself it was laundry mix-ups. Our mom is always doing laundry and tossing things into the wrong basket. It happens. It's not dramatic. And if Lily grabbed a hoodie because she was cold, I didn't want to be dramatic either. But last week, she left for school before me, and when I went to get my sneakers, they were gone. Not the kind of gone where you find them under the bed. Gone like someone had worn them out the door. I checked Lily's room and saw them by her backpack. I stared at them for a full minute, trying to decide how much I cared. Shoes aren't like hoodies. Shoes have your feet in them. They mold to you. It's gross to wear someone else's shoes. When Lily came home, I asked her about it. She shrugged like it didn't matter. I didn't take your shoes, she said. It was such a flat lie that I almost laughed, because Lily has always been a terrible liar. When she lies, her eyes flick away. Her voice gets higher. She talks too fast. She starts adding details no one asked for. This time, there were none of her usual tells. She said it like a fact, like the sky is blue. And then she smiled again, that same small smile, and walked away. Over the next few days, it got worse. She started wearing my clothes constantly, not occasionally. Not I grabbed your sweater because mine was dirty. Constantly. I'd see her in my favorite shirt again, then in my hoodie, then in my jeans. And every time I'd say something, she'd either smile or deny it completely. My parents didn't notice. Or if they noticed, they didn't care. That part was almost scarier than the stealing. Because if I said, "Mom, Lily has my shirt," my mom would glance up and say, "So?" She borrows things. Share. If I said, "Dad, she took my shoes," he'd barely look up from his phone and say, "You two are always fighting about clothes." But it didn't feel like fighting. It felt like something quiet and steady was happening, like an invisible hand was rearranging my life, and my parents were acting like I was the one making noise. Then Lily started talking like me. I know that sounds petty. People pick up speech patterns from each other all the time. Siblings especially. You spend years in the same house, you start using the same slang, the same jokes. That's normal. But Lily never used to copy the way I spoke. She had her own words, her own tone. She talked like a middle school kid. Now she was using words that didn't belong in her mouth. A few days ago, she said desultory in a sentence. Not as a joke, not like she was testing the word, like she knew exactly what it meant. Then she said misanthropic, and she said it smoothly, like it had always been part of her vocabulary. I had just learned those words from my SAT practice book. I had written them in my notes. I had been repeating them to myself in homeroom so I'd remember them. And I don't bring that book home. I keep it in my locker because I use it at school. Lily is in middle school. She's not studying for the SAT. She doesn't care about my vocab lists. She doesn't even like reading unless it's a very specific kind of book. So, how was she saying my words? I asked her where she learned them. She just smiled and said, "I don't know. They're just words." 2 days ago, something happened that turned my stomach over so hard I thought I might actually scream. I went into Lily's room in the morning to wake her up for school, like I sometimes do when Mom is busy and Lily's alarm is going off and she won't get up. I walked in half asleep and pulled her curtains open slightly to let light in. When she rolled over, I saw a freckle on the side of her nose. exactly where I have one. Lily has never had freckles. She's always had clear skin, no little marks. I've always had a few freckles scattered across my face. Not a ton, but enough that I know where they are because I've stared at myself in the mirror 1,000 times. I leaned closer and tried to wipe it off, thinking maybe it was dirt or a marker dot. It didn't come off. Throughout that day, she got more freckles. I watched them appear like someone was drawing them on slowly. And each one appeared in the exact place I have one. Same cheek, same line across the bridge of the nose, same tiny dot near the corner of the mouth. That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and checked my own face. My freckles looked fainter. Not gone yet, but lighter, like someone had taken an eraser to them. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it. Maybe Lily had always had a few freckles, and I never noticed. Maybe mine looked lighter because the bathroom lighting was different. Maybe I was tired and my eyes were playing tricks. Then I looked closer. My freckles were fading, and hers were getting darker. The worst part was her eyes. Lily's eyes have always been blue. Not gray blue, not green blue. Blue. Really blue. It's one of the first things people notice about her. It's the kind of eye color people compliment. My eyes are not blue. Mine are greenish-brown, hazel. Sometimes they look more green depending on light, sometimes more brown. But they've never been blue. At dinner a few nights ago, Lily's eyes looked different. They looked green, not hazel. Not maybe the light is warm. Green. A pale, clear green I had never seen in her face before. I stared at her across the table until she noticed me. She smiled with that same quiet smile, like she enjoyed being watched. I blinked hard and looked away, pretending I was just spacing out. I started watching her more carefully after that. I started noticing things I didn't want to notice, like how she stood with her shoulders, how she crossed her arms, how she tilted her head when she listened. She was starting to move like me too, and I hate writing that because it sounds insane. But it wasn't one habit. It was dozens of little things. The way she rested her weight on one leg, the way she tucked hair behind her ear, the way she paused before answering a question, like she was measuring her response. She also seemed taller, not suddenly, not like she stretched overnight. But when she walked past me in the hallway, she felt closer to my height than she used to. And I know kids grow, especially at her age. But it didn't feel like normal growth. It felt like she was catching up too fast. Yesterday, I saw Lily walking home from school. I was still inside our house, looking through the front window, waiting for my ride because I had a club meeting after school, and I was coming home later than usual. Our neighbors stopped Lily on the sidewalk and waved. I couldn't hear what they said, but I saw Lily wave back. Then I saw the neighbor's mouth form my name. My name, not Lily's. And Lily smiled and waved like it was normal, like she was answering to it. When Lily got inside, I asked her immediately, "Why did Mrs. Carter call you by my name?" I demanded. My voice came out sharper than I meant it to. Lily shrugged. She didn't. "I saw it," I said. "I literally saw it. I don't know what you're talking about," she said, and her eyes were green again. I told my mom that night. I tried to stay calm so she'd take me seriously. "Mom," I said, "something weird is happening with Lily." My mom was chopping vegetables and barely looked up. "What now?" "She's been taking my clothes. She's acting like me, and her eyes are changing." My mom finally looked at me, and her expression was annoyed, like I was wasting her time. "Lily's eyes have always been that color." "No," I said, and I could hear my voice shaking. "They were blue. I have photos." I went to my phone, pulled up old pictures, showed my mom Lily's blue eyes from last year, from family trips, from birthdays, from random selfies. My mom stared at the photos with a confused, blank expression. Then she handed the phone back like she didn't understand what I wanted her to see. "I have to make dinner," she said, and turned away. It was like the conversation slid off her. Then my dad came home, and everything got even worse. At dinner, my dad called Lily by my name. He didn't pause. He didn't correct himself. He looked at her and said my name like it had always belonged to her. And Lily smiled and answered him. Then she said, misanthropic again, and my dad started talking to her about the SAT, about test dates, about study guides, about college prep. I was sitting right there. I interrupted them, trying to force myself into the conversation, trying to remind them I exist. My dad didn't really seem to hear me. He looked at me, but his eyes didn't land. It felt like being looked through, like I was part of the background. That night I went into my bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror until my eyes burned. My freckles were gone, not faded, gone. My face looked too smooth, too plain, like someone had edited me. My eyes looked lighter. My skin looked paler, like the blood was draining out of me. Not gray, not sickly, but slowly losing color, like a photograph left in sunlight for too long. I pressed my fingers against my cheeks, and they felt cold. I slept badly. Every time I started to drift off, I'd jerk awake, convinced that if I fell asleep, something would happen, and I wouldn't be able to stop it. I kept listening for Lily's footsteps in the hallway, for the creak of my door, for whispering. I didn't hear anything, but that didn't comfort me. It just made the house feel too quiet. This morning, I woke up exhausted, like I hadn't slept at all. My limbs felt heavy, my head thick. I went to my closet and couldn't find my clothes. Not just one or two things missing, almost everything was gone. Shirts, jeans, hoodies, even my favorite socks. The hangers were empty in places where they shouldn't have been. The drawers looked wrong, like they'd been rummaged through and then arranged to look neat again. I was so tired I didn't even cry. I just stood there for a long time, staring into the emptiness, trying to understand how a person can disappear from their own life while still breathing. I had to borrow clothes from my mom's closet when she wasn't looking. I wore sandals because I couldn't find my sneakers. It was cold outside, and my feet felt numb by the time I got to school. The day felt unreal, like I was moving through it behind glass. In my first class, people looked past me. Not everyone, but enough that I noticed. A few kids said hey in that automatic way without really seeing my face. My best friend waved at me from across the hall, but when I waved back, her eyes drifted away like she'd mistaken me for someone else. In English, my hands shook so badly I couldn't hold my pen steady. The teacher asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine. My voice sounded thin and wrong. She told me to go to the nurse. I didn't go. I knew the nurse wouldn't help me, because this wasn't a stomachache. This wasn't a fever. This wasn't something you fix with a bandage or a phone call home. I didn't even know how to explain it without sounding insane. During the passing period on the way to math, I saw a girl ahead of me in the hallway. She was wearing my shirt, my exact shirt, the one I couldn't find this morning, and she was wearing my shoes, the sneakers I'd been looking for all week, the ones I knew by the scuff mark on the toe and the way the laces fray at the ends. Her hair was the same shade of brown as mine, and her face, freckles, my freckles, not random freckles. The same pattern, like someone had traced them from my skin and stamped them onto hers. She was walking next to one of my friends, and my friend was laughing at something she said, laughing the way she laughs with me. The girl turned her head slightly, and I saw her eyes. Green, that pale green. And I knew, with a certainty that made my stomach drop, that it was Lily. Not my Lily. Not my sister, who used to argue with me over music and steal my snacks, but Lily wearing me. Lily walking in my clothes, in my face, in my eyes, in my name. I stood in the hallway shaking, watching her disappear into the crowd, and nobody around me reacted like anything strange was happening. Kids brushed past me. Someone bumped my shoulder and didn't apologize. Voices echoed around me like I was underwater. I went into the nearest bathroom and locked myself in a stall. Right now I'm hiding here, trying not to pass out. My skin looks even paler under the fluorescent bathroom lights. My hands won't stop shaking. My stomach keeps clenching like it's trying to fold in on itself. I can hear girls laughing at the sinks, someone reapplying lip gloss, someone complaining about homework. Normal life happening a few feet away, and I feel like I'm fading, like I'm being erased slowly, carefully, and nobody will notice when I'm gone because the person who looks like me will still be there. Smiling, using my words, living my life as if it always belonged to her. I'm terrified that one day I won't wake up, but Lily will. Story 3. Since I was young, I belonged to a loose circle of people who met once a year along the same wooded river. We didn't call ourselves anything official most of the time. We didn't have flyers or a website or matching symbols on our jackets. It was just a tradition that kept pulling the same kinds of people back to the same place. Every equinox, the ones who still remembered the same schools, the same small towns, the same old hunting grounds would return to the river to mark the season changing. Some of them were friends. Some were rivals. Some were people who only ever spoke a few sentences to each other each year, yet still showed up like clockwork. We didn't always like one another, but we understood the same language of the woods, that certain places feel older than the people who walk through them, and that time moves differently when you step away from roads and lights. By tradition, the week belonged to freedom among the trees. Nothing neat, nothing pure. More like a temporary permission to become simple again. People did what they wanted, the things they couldn't do when the rest of the world was watching. Drinking, music, dares, games that felt half like childhood and half like something darker. Some people chased pleasure. Some chased secrets. Some chased the feeling of being part of something that didn't have to explain itself. We crossed paths now and then, but not constantly. A lot of people preferred to move alone, like the woods gave them privacy they couldn't find anywhere else. You'd see a familiar face at the river, share a bottle or a story, then disappear again for hours or days. That was normal. This year, I arrived late. Work delayed me, and then the drive turned slow because the weather couldn't decide what it wanted to do. By the time I hit the last stretch of hills, it was already night. The sky was a dull, heavy black, and the trees looked like jagged shapes against it. I kept expecting to see headlights ahead, or taillights, or any sign that other people were also making their way in. But the roads were empty. Not the normal kind of empty where you're just out in the country and it's late. This felt different. It felt as if the world had stepped back a few feet from itself. Even the air felt wrong, like it was holding something. I passed through a small town along the highway to pick up supplies. Every year, people did the same thing. Last-minute food, cheap alcohol, propane, extra batteries, whatever you forgot to pack. Usually the town was used to us. They might not love us, but they knew we'd come through and spend money. This time, nobody looked normal. I saw residents standing outside their houses as if they were listening. Their eyes kept shifting toward sounds I couldn't hear. A man sat on a porch swing that wasn't moving, hands clasped, staring into the road like he expected something to come out of the dark. In a gas station lot, two teenagers leaned against a car with their heads tilted, like dogs hearing a whistle. When I stopped for supplies, nobody was friendly. No small talk, no joking. The cashier barely looked at me. A woman stocking shelves kept flinching every time the automatic door opened, even when it was only another customer walking in. The town had too many panhandlers, and the panhandlers didn't move like normal people asking for money. They were thin and stiff and watchful. There were sickly strays everywhere, dogs with ribs showing, cats with mangy fur. They didn't run away when cars passed. They just watched. The worst part was the children. They didn't laugh. They didn't play. They looked tired and tense, and the adults around them looked like they hated the world for it. Desperation was in the kids' faces, and loathing was in their parents. It was the kind of mood that makes you want to leave quickly, not because you're afraid of getting robbed, but because you feel like you walked into a place where something bad has been happening for a while, and everyone's pretending it isn't. I paid for my supplies and didn't waste time. I didn't stand around. I didn't ask questions. I drove back into the hills toward the river and the familiar trails, expecting the tension to ease the moment I left the town behind. It didn't. The closer I got to the woods, the more the darkness felt heavy. The headlights didn't seem to reach as far as they should. The road signs looked older, more faded, and at the edges of the light, the trees seemed to lean inward like they wanted to listen. When I finally reached the area where our circle usually gathered, the first thing I noticed was the lack of smoke. Normally, by this time, there would be at least one campfire burning somewhere along the river. You'd see orange flicker through branches. You'd smell wood smoke. You'd hear laughter or music or the distant call of someone recognizing someone else. There was nothing. No glow. No voices. No movement. The only sign that anyone had been here at all were the white ribbons we used to mark certain trees. They hung from branches like pale flags. We've always used them as quiet markers, trail guidance, meeting points, the kind of thing you can spot in low light. Usually, though, there were also offerings. Nothing dramatic, just little acknowledgments left near the river or at certain stones. A token. A ribbon tied a certain way. A small object placed where it shouldn't be. This time, there were only the ribbons. And even the ribbons looked wrong, as if they'd been tied without care. Some hung low. Some were tangled. Some looked dirty. It felt less like a tradition and more like someone had tried to imitate it without understanding why it mattered. I parked and stepped out into the cold air. The land felt neglected, distressed, like the woods had been put through something and hadn't healed. I told myself the others must be farther in. Maybe they'd moved deeper along the river because of the weather. Maybe they'd chosen a different clearing. I had arrived late, so it was possible I'd missed the main gathering point. So, I started searching. I followed the trail along the river for a while, scanning for footprints, for tent shapes, for any sign of a group. I found dead animals along the path, small things, rabbits and birds, nothing huge, but enough that it felt wrong. The branches held no songbirds, no normal night noise. The river was sluggish, its pools thick with algae bloom that made the water look sick. The smell of mushrooms rose from the earth, strong and damp, even where I couldn't see any mushrooms. It wasn't the pleasant forest smell. It was a heavy, sweet rot. I expected to find someone any minute. Instead, I found stillness that felt like death. Eventually, with no better plan, I set up camp in a round meadow not far from the trail. In daylight, the clearing looks almost painted. Yellow flowers, purple weeds, white clusters scattered like small stars. The meadow is a wound left by old logging, a place where the trees never fully grew back. It gives you sight lines in all directions, which is why I've always liked it. You can see what's coming. You can hear things before they reach you. Safe, peaceful. That night, though, safety didn't feel real. I slept in my tent, with the opening facing the trees, listening to the wind push through bare branches. Winter hadn't fully arrived, but the trees were already stripped. They scraped and chafed against one another in the cold wind like dry bones. At some point in the night, I thought I heard a faint droning, a low musical vibration that passed through the breeze and vanished before I could decide it was real. I told myself it was the wind. I told myself it was nothing. Then I woke up again later, and this time the sound was undeniable. I lay still in my sleeping bag, eyes open, breath held. The quiet was so complete that when I swallowed, the sound of it felt loud. I stared out of the open mouth of the tent into the dark woods surrounding the clearing. The noise that floated through the trees was not the wind. It was unearthly. It held the harmony of a ghostly choir, the groaning of cattle, and the hiss of hot steel being quenched in water. It was layered, like multiple sounds occupying the same space. I couldn't tell direction or distance at first. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, like the woods themselves were singing through broken throats. Then it shifted, and I could place it, somewhere in the hills to the south. My body reacted before my mind finished thinking. I pulled on warmer clothes and armed myself with what I had. Not because I wanted to fight something, but because I needed my hands to have a purpose. A flashlight, a knife, something solid. The clearing around my tent looked the same, but the feeling in it had changed. The flowers seemed paler in the moonlight. The grass looked pressed down in strange patches. The air felt heavy, as if it had moisture in it, even though it was cold. I moved toward the old trail while keeping myself in the dark as much as possible. Two forces were moving toward each other beneath a pre-dawn sky bruised blue and purple. I didn't know that yet, but I could feel it, the way animals feel storms before humans do. I crouched in tall grass and waited. That's when I saw her. At first, she looked vaguely human, a hunched figure shambling along the hillside. She moved slowly, but steadily, like her joints were old, and her purpose was stronger than pain. A drum hung on her back and sounded with each step, not from her hand striking it, but from a clever string rigging that made it thump in rhythm as she walked. Strapped against her was a hurdy-gurdy, and it played without stopping. The resin-coated strings hissed and droned, grinding out the same endless tune. The instrument sounded like it was being tortured into music. The sound was constant, mechanical, and yet it carried intention, like it was guiding something. She wore a soaked cloak and shawl, ornamented with strange metallic charms that caught the moonlight. Little flashes of silver winked as she moved. The charms looked old, like coins or teeth or bits of metal that had been worn smooth. Her posture made her seem ancient, but the way she moved didn't feel frail. It felt practiced. A storm of wings gathered in the trees overhead. Birds, not just a few. So many that the branches seemed to carry shadow. They didn't fly away from her. They hovered and followed, flickering from tree to tree. And then I saw larger shapes moving too. Raccoons, whitetails, animals that normally keep distance from humans. They followed her like they were being pulled on strings. Songbirds flew ahead of her like scouts. It wasn't normal behavior, not even close. She didn't look at them. She didn't need to. The music did the work. Her destination was a hollow in the hillside, a dark chasm in the earth that I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't a small cave mouth. It was a wide-open wound, the kind of hole that looks like it goes down forever. The edges were ragged, as if the land had been torn apart. She reached the rim and walked the curve of it, still grinding that endless tune. Animals reached the edge and stepped in. One by one, they walked into the chasm without hesitation, like sleepwalkers. Deer, raccoons, smaller shapes. The birds, too, dropping down into the dark like falling leaves. I stared, frozen, trying to force my brain to label it as something else. A sinkhole, a strange migration, a disease. But the music was too clear in its control. As she moved along the rim, more animals streamed in from the woods, drawn by sound alone. And then I saw something that made my stomach drop. A hiking pack in the grass, clean and modern, left open like it had been dropped in a hurry. Beside it, a broken whiskey bottle glittered faintly. White ribbons lay scattered like trash instead of tied neatly to trees. Someone had been here. Someone from our circle. The woman's music rose and fell with intention, and as she played near the mouth of the hollow, sound itself seemed to distort. Notes stretched, echoes bent. For a moment, it felt like the air around her was a different thickness than the air around me. In that storm of noise, I forgot myself. I don't know how else to say it. My awareness slipped. It wasn't like falling asleep. It was like my mind stepped out of the room for a second. And when it stepped back in, everything had shifted. So complete was the sudden silence that nausea rose in my stomach. The world went still, and the stillness felt heavy like pressure in deep water. I heard nothing, not even the wind, not even my own breath for a few seconds. My ears rang. Then the woods began to crackle with disturbance. Branches snapped like gunshots. Stones tumbled down the hillside. Something vast was moving through the deeper forest, pushing through brush with the dull, rushing pressure of a herd. But this wasn't a herd of deer. This herd had no fixed shape. At first I saw only ripples, dark flashes between trees, like something moving too fast for the eye. Then shapes emerged, pale forms rushing forward in motion that made my skin crawl. They moved like animals whose joints bent the wrong way. They ran low, then high, then low again, as if their limbs didn't have consistent anatomy. Grass flattened in long, sweeping lines as they passed. The ground vibrated with them. Not like thunder, like bodies, many bodies. As they came closer, the shapes changed again. They shimmered like heat on asphalt, like flame without light. In one instant, they looked like breaking waves full of heads and limbs. In another, they looked like black oil melting together as it ran. And then I heard screaming mixed in with the movement. Human screaming. It froze my blood. For a brief moment, as dawn began to thin the darkness, the rising light revealed faces inside the shifting mass. Faces that flashed into view and then vanished again as the herd warped. I recognized one, then another. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. They were men and women I had known my whole life. People from our circle. People I had laughed with by fires. People I had watched disappear into the woods at night and return later with quiet smiles and strange stories. Now their bodies were twisted into bestial shapes, running on limbs that bent wrong, their voices joining the terrible chorus, driven forward like livestock. The old woman was playing again. She stood along the rim of the chasm, guiding the herd with her instrument like a shepherd guides animals with a staff. The hurdy-gurdy shrieked through the cold morning air, and the drum on her back marked the pace. One by one, the twisted shapes hurled themselves into the darkness below. Some went willingly. Some looked like they were trying to resist, but their legs kept carrying them anyway. The screaming rose, then cut off as each body dropped. I stood in the clearing, undisturbed, as if the herd and the woman didn't consider me part of what was happening. They flowed past me like a flood around a rock. When the last shape disappeared into the hole, the forest fell utterly still. The birds overhead were gone. The animals were gone. Even the wind seemed to stop. The woman turned her head toward me. I couldn't see her face clearly under the dripping shawl, but I felt her attention land on me like a hand. I felt pinned in place by it. Though we stood far apart, I heard her voice clearly, as if she whispered directly into my ear. "You came late." The words were simple, almost casual, and they terrified me more than the screaming had, because they meant she knew I was supposed to be here. She knew I belonged to whatever this was. She knew I was expected. My body moved before my mind could argue. I backed away, then turned and ran. I didn't run toward the chasm. I didn't run toward the woman. I ran the way you run when the world has shown you something you cannot unsee. Behind me, I heard the instrument start again. Not loud at first, then stronger. A grinding note that followed me through the trees like a thread. I didn't look back. I ran until my lungs burned and the taste of metal filled my mouth. I ran until the woods thinned and I found the road, and I kept running until the sound faded into distance. Only then did I stop, doubled over, shaking, trying to convince myself I had not just watched people I knew get herded into a hole in the earth by a woman with a drum on her back. I didn't follow it that morning. I left the river behind. I left the ribbons behind. I left my tent. I left supplies I couldn't carry. I didn't care about money or gear. I cared about distance. And yet, as the day wore on, one thought settled in my mind with horrible certainty. This wasn't random. It wasn't an accident. It was scheduled. It was ritual. It was a week marked on a calendar older than my life. It was something that would happen whether I watched it or not. And I understood what the town's faces had been telling me. The unfocused eyes, the listening posture, the feeling that everyone was waiting for something they didn't want to name. They weren't scared of ghosts. They weren't scared of bears. They were scared of the equinox. When winter gives way to spring again, when the next equinox arrives and the world shifts its weight, I know what will happen. I will be in the forest for the culling. Story 4. My family has lived in the same small rural town for decades. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where you can't stop for gas without hearing the same names you heard at church, at school events, at the diner. It's the kind of place where a story can outlive the person who started it. Because people don't just tell stories here, they keep them. They repeat them. They polish them and pass them down like old tools. We have all the usual local legends. The woman in white on the back road, the cry you hear near the river at night, the abandoned barn where teenagers swear they saw something moving. Most of those stories change depending on who's telling them, and most people treat them like entertainment, something to talk about when the power goes out or when you're driving a long stretch with nothing to look at but dark trees. But one story never really goes away. One story stays exactly where it is, like it's anchored to the land. It's about a bunker at the edge of town. Nobody calls it by an official name, because as far as I know, it doesn't have one. Everybody just calls it the Devil's Basement. If you grow up here, you hear about it early. Kids hear it from older siblings hear it from their friends' parents. Parents hear it from the old guys who sit outside the hardware store and talk like they've been alive forever. The story is always the same in the way that matters. There's a bunker. It isn't supposed to be there. Nobody remembers who built it, and you shouldn't go inside. A lot of older folks will mention it, but my grandpa was the one who really kept it alive in our family. He wouldn't shut up about it. Road trips, family dinners, sitting on the porch at night, anytime there was a lull in conversation, he'd fill it with the Devil's Basement. Most of the time I could tell he was exaggerating. He'd change details depending on his mood or how much he'd had to drink. One night, the bunker would be as big as a football stadium. Another night, it would be deep enough to touch hell. Sometimes it was built by the government. Sometimes by a cult. sometimes by a rich man who disappeared. Sometimes he'd make it funny just to get a reaction out of me. But every now and then, usually after he'd had enough whiskey to lose his playful edge, he'd tell one version of the story that barely changed at all. When he told it that way, he didn't smile much. He didn't turn it into a joke. He'd stare at the table or out into the yard like he could still see what happened. That was the version that stuck with me. He always started the same way. Back in the mid-60s, he and a few of his friends got really drunk. He'd pause right there and complain about how kids were always staring at their damn phones nowadays, and how back then they had to make their own fun. Then he'd laugh a little, but it would be a dry laugh that didn't match the story. They were teenagers, or just barely past it. Old enough to get into trouble, young enough to think trouble couldn't truly hurt them. They'd been drinking something cheap and strong, out behind someone's house or down by the edge of a field, passing a bottle around and daring each other to do stupid things. He said it was the kind of night where you feel fearless because you're numb and loud and surrounded by your friends. One of his buddies dared him to go into the devil's basement for $10. Every time Grandpa told that part, he'd stop and lecture whoever was listening about how much $10 was back then. He'd say you could buy a whole week's worth of food, or fill up a tank of gas, or take a girl out and still have money left. Then he'd shake his head and say kids today don't understand money. I used to roll my eyes at that part, but when I got older, I realized it wasn't really about money. It was about the moment. About the way $10 can feel like a trophy when you're young, even if it's not much. Of course, he took the bet. He always said that part with a little pride, like refusing would have been worse than anything inside the bunker. The bunker was already an urban legend then. People talked about it like it had always been there, like it had just appeared one day, and then everyone accepted it. Nobody knew who built it. Nobody knew why. It wasn't marked on any maps that anyone in town had seen. It sat near the edge of some old land, half hidden by brush and trees, like it was trying not to be noticed, but also not trying very hard. My grandpa said when he got to the entrance, the first thing he noticed was heat. Some people had told him that before, and he'd laughed it off. It was summer, of course it was hot. But he said this heat was different. Dry. Heavy. The kind of heat you feel when you open an oven door, except there was no flame and no source. It felt like the air itself had been warmed by something living inside it. He said the bunker smelled strange, too. Not like dirt and moss the way you expect from something underground. It smelled lived in, like old breath, like something had been down there long enough to fill the space with itself. That was the first moment he considered turning back. He could have walked out of the grass, back to his friends, and laughed it off, told them he changed his mind. But he said the idea of losing the money made him angry, like it would make him look weak. And he told himself he was just being paranoid. It was only a bunker, a stupid local story. He'd walk in, walk out, and take the $10. So he went in. He said he expected it to be small. A short hallway, maybe a single room, something you could explore in a minute and then brag about. But after about 30 seconds of walking, he realized he couldn't see the end of it. The bunker was too big. Not big like a large basement. Big like it had been built for something serious. Like it wasn't meant to be a shelter for a storm. It felt more like a piece of a larger structure that had been buried and forgotten. And it wasn't just the size. It was the darkness. My grandpa said he brought a flashlight, but it didn't help the way it should have. The beam didn't seem to travel far. The dark ahead didn't open up when light touched it. It felt like something was swallowing the light, pulling it in, making it smaller. He described it once as black hole dark. And that's how it always sounded when he said it, like he was reaching for any comparison that could explain how unnatural it felt. That's when he knew something was wrong. Not spooky wrong. Not I'm a kid in a scary place wrong. Wrong in a physical way, the way your body reacts before your brain decides what's happening. He said he'd had the thought, this place isn't empty. It only feels empty. And the second that thought came to him, he stopped walking. Then he realized something else had stopped too. He hadn't noticed it before, and that bothered him more than anything. Up until that moment, while he'd been walking, there had been a sound following him, a slow, dragging sound. Uneven, like something heavy being pulled across stone by hands. Not footsteps, not shoes. Something that didn't lift its weight properly. He said he didn't hear it clearly until the silence hit. The moment he stopped, it stopped. And that silence made the sound real in his mind, like his brain finally admitted what his ears had been hearing. He told me later that this was the worst part. Hearing the dragging was terrifying, yes, but the horror came from not hearing it, from knowing that whatever it was, it knew he had paused. It was paying attention to him. It wasn't an animal moving around randomly. It was following. He didn't run right away. He said his first reaction was to turn slowly, as quietly as he could, like if he moved carefully enough, he could catch it and prove it was just a rat or some piece of scrap. Metal sliding around. For a moment, he thought it worked. He turned, took a cautious step back toward the entrance, and the darkness behind him stayed still. Then the dragging started again. Only now it sounded closer, not in front of him, not far down the bunker, behind him, right behind him, like it had closed distance in the moment he turned, and it had done it silently. That's when he ran. He didn't look back. He didn't shout. He didn't even breathe properly. He said he ran until he saw a light again, until the mouth of the bunker appeared, and he exploded out into the night air like a man breaking the surface of water. And here's the part that always made my skin crawl. He said despite how long it felt like he'd been down there, despite how the darkness seemed to stretch time, he got out in. Under 15 seconds. He'd barely been inside. He'd barely had time to become afraid. Outside, his friends were exactly where he'd left them, sitting in tall yellow-green grass, passing around a bottle of whiskey, laughing at something unrelated. They didn't even look up the way you'd expect. Nobody rushed to ask if he was okay. Nobody reacted like he'd just sprinted out of the dark with terror all over his face. My grandpa said he tried to laugh it off. He forced a nervous chuckle and said, "It's creepy down there, man." But they weren't listening. They kept laughing. They kept talking. One of them tossed him the whiskey bottle like the whole dare was already over in their minds, like it had never mattered. That should have been the end of it. For everyone else, it was. They moved on. They grew up. They got jobs and wives and kids. They told the bunker story once in a while like a campfire tale. But not my grandpa. He went back. Not that week. Not that year. But later. Years later, when he was older and had a car and could drive out there without needing friends to make it feel like a game. Then he went again after that. And again. And again. He never stayed long. Never went far. But he kept returning like a man checking a locked door. Sometimes, he said, he didn't even go in. He'd just stand at the entrance and look into the dark. Not like he was daring himself. More like he was waiting for something to happen. Or checking whether something was waiting for him. When he told these parts, his voice always got quieter. He never made jokes here. He'd stare at his glass. Over time, he said, the heat got worse. The air near the entrance felt hotter every time. Not like summer heat, but like dry oven heat. The bunker also seemed to grow. That sounds impossible when I write it out, but he said it like a fact, like something he measured with his own body. The first time he went in, it felt like 30 seconds before the scale hit him. Later, it felt like 15 seconds. Then 10, like the place was bigger sooner, closer to the entrance, as if the inside was pushing outward. He also said unusual things started happening quicker. The darkness felt thicker right away. The air smelled more lived in. Sometimes he'd hear the dragging almost immediately, like it wasn't deeper in the bunker anymore, like it was waiting closer. Then, one day, the door wouldn't work. He told me this part more than once, always the same. He went out there and tried the handle. It wouldn't budge. He tried again harder, like he was angry now, like the bunker was refusing him. Nothing. At first, he assumed it had rusted shut, or someone had locked it. Maybe the county had finally decided it was a hazard. Maybe someone had welded it. He pressed his ear against the metal door to listen for any sign of space behind it. That's when he heard something new. Breathing. Slow, deep, patient breathing. Like a huge animal asleep on the other side of the door. Not frantic, not struggling. Just steady, confident breath, like it had all the time in the world. Grandpa said he backed away so fast he nearly fell. After that, he stopped going for a while. Or at least he claimed he did. He became more quiet as he got older, more reserved. He still told the story, but not with the same joking energy. Sometimes he'd start talking about the bunker and then stop mid-sentence, as if he could hear something that made him decide to shut up. Last year, after Thanksgiving dinner, I finally asked him the question that had been sitting in my throat for years. Why did you keep going back? We were in his kitchen. Everyone else had moved into the living room to watch football. My grandpa sat at the table with a glass of whiskey, looking tired. His hand shook slightly when he lifted the glass, not enough to spill, but enough to notice. He stared past me at the window like the dark outside had something to say. Grandpa, I said, trying to sound casual, why did you keep going back to that place all those years? If it scared you so bad, why didn't you just leave it alone? He didn't answer right away. He stayed quiet, eyes unfocused, like he was listening for a sound under the sound of the house. Then he turned to me slowly, and his expression was serious in a way I didn't see often. Not drunk serious, not story serious, real serious. Because a part of me never left, he said. I felt my stomach drop so hard it made me dizzy. I tried to laugh, tried to make it a joke, tried to push it back into the category of old stories. What does that even mean? I asked. He didn't answer. He just took a slow sip of whiskey and stared at the table like the wood grain had something written in it. That line has stayed with me ever since. Because if it was only a spooky story, he wouldn't have said it that way. He wouldn't have looked the way he looked when he said it. And he wouldn't have gone back again and again, not to prove he was brave, but like he was checking on something he'd lost. I don't know what the Devil's Basement is. I don't know who built it or why it's there. I don't know if it's truly bigger inside or if my grandpa's memory warped over time. But I do know this. He was not the kind of man who scared easily. He fought in his own ways. He worked hard. He raised kids. He survived things most people in town only talked about. And something in that bunker made him run. Something in that bunker made him return. And when he told me that a part of him never left, I believed him in a way I didn't want to. Because in a town like mine, stories last longer than the people who tell them. And sometimes, so do the places they warn you about. Story 5. People never believed me. After all these years locked inside this asylum, nobody has ever truly listened. Not the doctors, not the nurses, not even the other patients who talk to themselves in the corners and swear they've seen angels in the ceiling tiles. No one believed what I told them. And as the years kept stacking up, even I started to question myself sometimes. I would lie awake at night and replay it all, wondering if my mind had built a story to protect me from something worse. Then I'd laugh. Not a normal laugh, not the kind you can control. It would come out of me like a seizure. I'd laugh until my throat hurt, until tears ran down my face, until I slid off the bed and curled on the floor like a broken toy, still laughing. The staff always took that as proof. Proof that I was unstable. Proof that I was dangerous. Proof that the court was right. They don't see what that laughter really is. It isn't joy. It isn't humor. It's what happens when your reality becomes so twisted that words can't carry it anymore, so your body tries to release it in the only way it can. And every time I did it, their eyes would get colder, their voices more careful. They didn't see a man trying to warn them. They saw a madman, a killer. Before this place, before the locked doors and the medications and the watchful cameras, my life was simple. I was a phytologist. I studied plants. I researched them, classified them, spent long months in hot, wet forests collecting samples that would end up sealed in clean glass and labeled with neat handwriting. I worked in the Amazon often because the Amazon is a kind of living library that never stops rewriting itself. Every year, new species are found. For people like me, it's not just exciting, it's addictive. You walk into that green world, and you feel like you're standing in the middle of a secret. The Amazon is also home to plants that feel unreal even when you're staring right at them. Strange orchids, massive blooms, species so rare they're practically legends to the outside world. So when an email arrived inviting me to join a week-long expedition, I couldn't sit still. My hands were shaking when I reread it. I said yes immediately. There were 7 of us on that team. Officially, we were going to study tree types, check on endangered plant life, document changes in the environment, and if we got lucky, discover something new. That was the clean version. That was what went in the paperwork. But we all knew why we were truly there. We were hunting the blue moon. You've probably heard stories like that before, some mythical thing people talk about online, the way they talk about Bigfoot or Atlantis. But the blue moon wasn't just a campfire rumor. There were records. There were claims. There were 3 sightings across history that had enough detail to make professionals pay attention, even if they didn't say so out loud. No one could agree on what it truly was. Some said it was a rare blue orchid. Others claimed it was a glowing blue rose. The one thing every story shared was the smell. People described it like a drug you inhale, sweet, sharp, rich, and impossible to forget. The blue moon was connected to a tribe that was hard to locate, even by people who lived in the rainforest. They were called the Beatrix. Most information about them came from other tribes because the Beatrix didn't want to be found. According to the stories, they used the blue moon in a yearly ritual to worship a demon called Baron Waha, a name outsiders often translated as Monster King. The Beatrix believed the flowers were pieces of him, scattered through the jungle. Once a year, they gathered as many as they could, made a pile, and called him back. The reward, according to the stories, was simple. Wishes granted. Food, wealth, protection, luxury, things that didn't belong in a remote jungle settlement. But the price was just as simple. When the ritual ended, one member of the tribe would vanish, not die, not be buried, just disappear. Man or woman, child or elder, devoted or careless, a sacrifice, taken in exchange. People said the Beatrix used to number in the thousands, and now they were only a few hundred. Rumors said the missing ones were the reason. You might wonder why serious researchers would chase something that sounds like a horror movie. The reason had a name: Felix Bridges. Felix was a famous explorer, tough, experienced, and not the kind of person who built his reputation on fantasy. He was the first modern person who claimed he saw the blue moon with his own eyes. And when he published what he found, it caused a storm. In his report, he described moving through the Amazon on one of his yearly trips, looking for a rare orchid. He pushed through a wall of leaves and vines and found what looked like a hidden opening, a gateway covered by plants, the way nature hides things it doesn't want touched. He stepped through. On the other side was a settlement, small huts made of hay, people moving around, shouting, laughing, living. Their faces were painted blue, a sign he recognized from stories about the Beatrix. And in the center, a crowd was gathered around a pile of something that glowed like a bruise lit from inside. From where he stood, he couldn't see clearly at first, but he thought it was flowers. Then, the people dropped to their knees together and stretched their hands toward the pile, like they were warming them by a fire. The pile started glowing brighter. Blue light spilled over everything. Even from a distance, it looked sharp, like it could cut. Felix wrote that the light was so intense, it felt like staring into welding sparks. Then, after about a minute, the glow died. The crowd moved. They scattered the flowers and pulled something out. A wild boar. They piled the blue flowers again, prayed again. The glow returned, then faded. They scattered the pile again, and this time they pulled out stacks of thick fur coats. Again and again it happened. Bronze pots, silver utensils, gold jewelry. Objects that felt wrong in a jungle village, like someone had dropped a rich man's storehouse into the rainforest. Felix wrote that his mind fought to stay logical. He kept trying to explain it as some trick, some illusion, some misunderstanding. But every time the pile gave them something new, that logic weakened. Then something growled from inside the pile. Not a person, not an animal he could name, a sound that seemed to come from deeper than the flowers themselves. The whole settlement froze. The kneeling people stood and formed circles around the pile. One by one, each person stepped forward and stood in front of it, waiting as if they were being judged. At first, Felix thought it was just part of the ritual, the kind of thing tribes do to show respect or to ask blessings. But then, a boy stepped forward, maybe 10 years old, Felix guessed. As the pile began to glow again, the boy's parents started crying and shouting. People grabbed the child by his arms and legs like he was a sack of grain, and before the parents could get close, they threw him into the glowing flowers. The pile shook. It trembled like something underneath it was waking up. The vibration grew until it felt violent, and then the pile exploded outward, launching glowing blue flowers across the ground. Felix wrote that one of the flowers flew so far it actually hit him, even though he was hiding at a distance. When the light was gone and the flowers were scattered, the boy was gone too. No blood, no bones, no scream, nothing. Felix's report said he should have been focused on running, on surviving, but his attention snapped to the flower that hit him. Up close, it was like nothing he'd ever seen. Round, delicate petals, an icy turquoise color, and a smell so rich it almost made him dizzy. But the strangest part was the glow. It wasn't steady. Sometimes it shone like a firefly, and other times it dulled like a dying ember. He didn't realize the tribe had spotted him until they were already moving. They came fast, shouting, spears raised, tips dark with poison. Felix ran. He barely made it back through the hidden gateway, but in the panic, he dropped the flower and couldn't go back for it. When he returned home and published his account, people argued about it. Many called it fake. Some said he'd gone too long without sleep and hallucinated. But even the critics couldn't stop the story from spreading, because the story wasn't just scary, it was tempting. People started searching for the Beatrix and the blue moon. Nobody could find the gateway again, not even Felix. It was like the jungle itself chose who could step through. Some people later claimed they'd seen the blue moon. They never had proof. Some died before they could show anything. Some vanished. Some came back wrong. The ones who came back insane all said the same thing. They could smell it. Not once, not sometimes, all the time. They woke up smelling it. They ate meals and tasted it. They tried to work and smelled it. They couldn't escape it even in sleep. The scent filled their whole world until nothing else existed. Some of them became so desperate to smell something different that they did things that still make my stomach turn when I remember them talking, smelling garbage, chemicals, their own waste, laughing with relief, because for a second it wasn't the flower. Day by day they broke apart. And Felix? People asked that too. Why didn't he go insane? He did, just in a different way. After his expedition, he went home, and his wife died from small cell lung cancer. The next year, when he returned to search again, his daughter died in a car accident. Something in him snapped. He started making 3 or 4 trips to the Amazon every year, burning through money like he was trying to buy back the past. He never found the gateway again. He lost his finances, then his hope. He killed himself by swallowing a pile of sleeping pills. In his hand was a scrap of paper with one line written on it. I can smell it. If I had known all of that before, if I'd understood how the blue moon reached out and took pieces from people long before it ever touched them, I swear I would have stayed home. I would have chosen my safe lab and my safe life and ignored every itch of curiosity in my bones. But I didn't. I went. Our 7-person team was made up of some of the best researchers in the world. People with awards and reputations and the kind of confidence that comes from being right more often than you're wrong. Standing among them, I felt small, like a beginner invited into a room full of masters. I also knew why I had been chosen. I was one of the few people on the planet who could speak, write, and understand the Beatrek language. I'd learned it in a strange way, through old texts, half-decayed notes from researchers, fragmented recordings, and translated myths. If you asked me why I did it, I honestly couldn't give you a clean answer. I just felt drawn to it. The same way some people feel drawn to the ocean even when they can't swim. Felix's report had gotten under my skin. The ritual. The blue, painted faces. The glowing flowers. I read everything I could find and then kept digging, like I was trying to reach something buried deep. At one point, if someone had tested me, I might have known more about the Beatrek than anyone alive. That knowledge didn't save me. It just made me useful. The first 4 days of our expedition were a failure, at least on paper. We didn't complete our official tasks. We barely tried. Everything we did was shaped around one question. Where is the blue moon? By day 4, I could see it on everyone's faces. The excitement was fading. The reality of the jungle, heat, insects, exhaustion was winning. Some of them were ready to call it, to spend the remaining days collecting normal samples and go home with something that looked respectable. On day 5, I decided to push farther from our base alone. I told myself I was searching for clues, hints, signs, anything. I had a map, a compass, a flashlight, and a satellite phone. I wasn't worried about getting lost or stuck in the dark. I thought I was prepared. After about 30 minutes, I found a place that looked like it belonged on a postcard, a large cave with a waterfall spilling near its mouth. The water was cold, clear, and beautiful. For a few minutes, I forgot the blue moon and just stood there enjoying it like a tourist, letting my skin cool down. Then, the weather turned. It happened fast. The bright blue sky became dark like someone had thrown a blanket over the sun. Thunderclouds rolled in and rain fell hard, thick, and loud. I ran into the cave to avoid getting soaked, thinking I'd wait it out. The cave was bigger inside than it looked outside. It smelled of damp stone and old earth. Spiderwebs covered corners like dusty curtains. Thick fungi clung to the walls. When my flashlight swept up, a colony of bats burst out in a panic. They flew so close to my face I felt air from their wings. My heart hammered. For a second I thought they would swarm me, but they rushed out into the rain. After that, the cave seemed normal, just a cave. Until I saw the door. It was set into the inner wall like it had been built there, not placed. A wooden door, old and cracked, barely hanging on rusty hinges. It looked wrong in a cave the way a mirror looks wrong in a forest. Too human, too intentional. At first, I wanted nothing to do with it. The jungle is full of places you shouldn't touch. But the door pulled at me. I can't explain it better than that. It felt like it was waiting for my hand. So I opened it. Behind it was a tunnel, small and tight, only big enough for a grown man to crawl. And I could see light at the far end. Bright light. The kind of light you see on a sunny day. That didn't make sense, because outside the cave it was still storming. I knew, even as I got down on my knees, that curiosity can be a blessing and a curse. It leads to discoveries. It also leads people into graves. I crawled into the tunnel. The space was cramped. Stones scraped my shoulders. Dirt pressed into my knees. I kept moving, telling myself it would be quick, telling myself I could turn back whenever I wanted. After what felt like 5 minutes, I reached the end and pushed myself out into the open. The brightness hit me like a slap. I covered my eyes and stood up, blinking through the sudden change. When my vision adjusted, I saw blue sky and hot sunlight. No rain, no clouds. The ground looked dry, like it hadn't seen a storm in days. Then I saw the huts, hay houses, a small settlement. People moving through their day, children playing, women sweeping, men walking with spears. And when one of them turned his head, I saw the blue paint on his face. My stomach dropped. I knew where I was, the Beatrix. Shock glued me to the spot. I stood there staring like an idiot, and that was enough. They noticed me almost immediately. A scream went up. Then another. Men started running toward me, spears raised. Their faces weren't curious. They were furious. I tried to move, but my body locked up, as if roots had grown from my feet into the dirt. The distance between us closed fast. At the last second, instinct snapped me free, and I turned to run. I tripped. I hit the ground hard, breath knocked out of me. For a second, I couldn't even push myself up. I heard feet pounding toward me and knew I was about to die in a place nobody would ever find. I squeezed my eyes shut and raised my hands to cover my face. Then, desperate, I spoke in their language. I told them I was a researcher. I said I came to learn. I begged them not to kill me. I promised to leave and never speak of what I'd seen. I waited for the pain. It didn't come. Minutes passed. No spear hit me. No shouting. The silence became its own kind of torture. Because silence means people are deciding what to do with you. Finally, I forced myself to open my eyes. A tall man stood in front of me. He was strong, broad, and calm. He held out his hand like someone offering help to a friend. He smiled warmly, like the screaming and rushing and weapons had never happened. I didn't understand. I still don't fully understand. But I took his hand, because refusing felt like a mistake that could turn his smile into a sentence. He pulled me up. After that, everything became even stranger. The Beatrix treated me like a guest. People escorted me everywhere, not in a threatening way, but in a constant way, 2 or 3 always nearby, smiling, talking, guiding. They showed me the settlement. They laughed easily. Children peeked at me and then ran away giggling. At lunch, the whole tribe ate together at a massive wooden table, big enough for hundreds of people. The sight alone was impressive, But it was the food that made my mind spin. I expected simple meals, fish, roots, fruit. Instead, I was served a perfect medium rare steak, smoked pork, a fresh vegetable salad with lime, orange juice that tasted like it had been squeezed seconds before. More dishes came, rich and seasoned, like the menu of a high-end restaurant. A tribe cut off from the modern world should not have been eating like that. After lunch, they took me to a building called Ani Melasuplau, which they translated for me as the resting place. It was a solid, well-built house. Inside, the same man who had helped me up sat waiting. He was the chief. Again, I was treated with comfort, with politeness, with a level of hospitality that made me uneasy. People like that don't usually welcome outsiders unless they want something. Over time, the warmth made me careless. I got comfortable. I started to believe I could ask questions and survive the answers. So I asked him about Baron Waha and the Blue Moon. He smiled and said yes, he would answer. We walked to a quiet hut near the resting place, one that looked like it was used for storage. We sat on the outer porch where no one else could easily hear, and I started what felt like an interview. Everything he said to me was in the Beatrix language, but I'm writing it now in English because that's the only way anyone outside might understand. I asked him about the history of the tribe and why they were so hidden. He told me they were once huge, over 5,000 people, successful, self-sufficient, happy. Then an illness came. People started dying in their sleep. Within a few years, thousands were gone. The tribe shrank to under 1,000, terrified they would disappear completely. Then, he said, he came to save us. I asked if he meant Baron Waha. The chief said yes. He spoke about Baron Waha like a savior, like a parent. He admitted Baron Waha was a demon, but insisted that to them, he was their god. He said a parent will do anything to protect their children, even if the methods look cruel. I pointed out the obvious, that he was describing a being that was evil and would go to any lengths to get what it wanted. The chief agreed. Then I asked why they worshipped something like that, knowing it could be using them. At that, the chief laughed. It wasn't friendly laughter. It was sharp and wild, like something inside him had been waiting for a chance to come out. It went on too long, loud enough that it made my skin prickle. When he finally stopped, his smile stayed, but it felt thinner. He apologized, still amused, and told me it was funny how far the rumor had traveled. I asked, what rumor? He said the rumor that Baron Waha meant Monster King. He told me they started that rumor themselves. My mouth went dry. I asked him why. He said it was part of a plan their Lord created, a plan that was finally working. I asked what the plan was. Instead of answering, he asked me a question. What do I think the main goal of an evil entity is? I gave the obvious answer. Control, corruption, destruction. He nodded, but said the real goal was to spread evil, to make people lose faith in good, to make them desperate enough to reach for darkness and call it salvation. He said the moment people worship evil as if it were God, evil has won. He paused after that, letting it sit between us. I wanted to tell him that sounded exactly like what Baron Waha had done to his tribe, made them desperate, then offered help at a price. But after seeing the way his laughter cracked, I didn't want to push him. I could feel that the polite surface could vanish quickly. So I asked again, what is the plan? He leaned back as if he had all the time in the world. He told me their Lord had planned everything from the beginning. It started with spreading rumors and ended with me. He said they wanted to take back their place in the world that forgot them. He said my society, my so-called society, would perish, and nothing could stop it now. Then he said something that still echoes in my head, even in this room with padded walls. He said a better question wasn't what's the plan, but what's part of the plan? And he answered it himself. Everything. He told me their Lord planned it all, down to the smallest detail. He talked about Felix, the pesky white foreigner who stepped through the gateway years ago. He said Felix had been shown what they wanted him to see. The ritual wasn't something Felix stumbled onto. It was staged for him. He said Felix didn't escape because he was skilled. He escaped because they let him. They wanted Felix to tell the world. They wanted the world to crave the blue moon. At that point, the chief stood up. One of the tribe members brought him a bowl that gave off thick smoke. The smoke rose in steady curls, and the smell made my nose sting even from a distance. The member left. The chief sat down again, holding the bowl like it was normal. Then he told me what Baron Waha really meant. Not Monster King. The one who travels through smell. He said their lord lived in the flowers, especially in their fragrance. He said when someone smelled the blue moon, Baron Waha entered them and purified their mind. Purified. That word sounded wrong. Too clean. Too holy for what he was describing. He said the harder someone resisted the purification, the stronger they could smell the flower. That resistance either ended with them joining the good side, meaning the Beatrix side, or becoming unable to join any side at all. I asked him why he was telling me this. He looked at me with that steady smile and told me I was the final piece. I was the one who would win it for them. And he said if I tried to warn people, no one would believe me. They would call me insane. They would laugh at me while I tried to save them. Then he said softly, like he was giving me a gift, that was my destiny. And then he lifted the bowl and blew the smoke directly into my face. It hit me like a wave, thick, heavy, sweet in a sick way. I coughed. My eyes watered. My chest tightened. For a moment, I couldn't get air. I remember trying to stand, trying to push away, but my arms felt like they belonged to someone else. Then everything dropped away. When I woke up, I sat up fast, heart racing. For a few seconds, I couldn't remember where I was. Then I recognized the cave, the same damp stone, the same smell, the same dark mouth opening toward the outside. It was evening. The rain had stopped. I looked at the inner wall where the door had been. There was no door. Relief flooded me so hard I almost cried. I told myself it was a dream, a stress hallucination, something my mind made from old stories and fear. Then I put my hand on the ground beside me. My fingers touched something soft, something delicate. I knew what it was before I lifted it, and I begged silently for it to be anything else. I brought it up into my view. The blue moon, turquoise blue, small petals, that strange shifting glow, and the scent, sweet, rich, inviting, rising up like it had been waiting for my lungs. Panic exploded through me. I threw the flower away and covered my mouth and nose, stumbling to my feet. That's when I realized what I had been lying on. A pile of them. Blue moons, stacked like someone had dumped an entire field into the cave. The smell was everywhere. It wasn't in the air. It was in me. It sank into my throat and my mind, and the world tilted. I ran. I remember sprinting out of the cave into the wet jungle, my feet slipping, my vision narrowing. Then, everything went black again. After that, my memory comes in flashes, like a camera going off in a dark room. A moment of light, a moment of nothing, again and again. When my mind finally stabilized, the first thing I understood was screaming. Women screaming, high and terrified. I looked down and saw a knife in my hand. It was soaked with blood. Next to me was a body. I couldn't make a sound. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. My limbs felt heavy. My thoughts moved like they were trying to swim through mud. The police came quickly. They pulled me up, shoved me into a car, took me to a station. I spent 2 nights in a cell, barely sleeping, barely eating, replaying the cave and the chief and the smoke and the smell. When they brought me before a judge, I told them everything. I told them about Baron Waha. I told them about the Beatrix. I told them about the plan, about smell, about the blue moon. They laughed. The judge looked at me like I was a broken tool. The prosecutor spoke about mental instability. My defense lawyer saw an opening and pushed for an insanity plea. It's not easy to win those anymore, but the judge accepted it for me. Instead of prison, they sent me here, a psychiatric institution, indefinite stay. As long as it takes, they said, until I'm stable by their standards. When I arrived, I learned 2 things from the television in the cafeteria, locked behind clear plastic and tuned to one channel like the truth needed to be rationed. The first thing was that I had apparently led the expedition team to the cave where a huge amount of blue moons were found. It was called one of the biggest discoveries in recent history. My name was spoken with respect. I was praised. The second thing was that at the celebration party after the expedition, I had suddenly turned violent. I had stolen a knife from the buffet and stabbed a colleague multiple times, killing him. I watched the report like it was describing someone else's life. My stomach rolled. I started shouting that it was all part of the plan, that the flower was a trap, that nobody understood what they were touching. They sedated me. That's what they do when you raise your voice in a place like this. They don't listen harder. They drug you quieter. Years passed. 1 year, 2, 3, more. I told my story to anyone who would stand still long enough. A fellow patient rocking back and forth. A nurse who wouldn't meet my eyes. A doctor with a clipboard and a polite smile. Even a guard who looked bored and tired. No one believed me. Nobody ever said you're lying. They didn't need to. They said the same thing every time, in the same soft tone, like they'd been trained. Everything will be all right soon. Don't worry. Nothing became all right. And my indefinite period never ended. All those years, 2 questions haunted me more than anything else. Why me? And how? How did I guide them to the cave? How did I kill someone when I could barely remember my own name? Over time, as my mind cleared, I started to understand. Not all at once, piece by piece, like putting together a puzzle when you don't even know what the picture is supposed to be. When the final piece finally snapped into place, I shouted out loud and then collapsed into laughter and crying at the same time. Laughing because the answers were so simple, and crying because I couldn't change any of it. The first question, why me, was the wrong question. The real question was, why not me? I wasn't chosen because I was special. I wasn't the only one who could have played the part. I was a pawn pulled from a crowd of other pawns. The plan didn't need me specifically. It needed someone like me, someone curious, someone who could speak their language, someone the world would trust at first, then discard when the time came. I was just unlucky enough to win a kind of evil lottery. The second question, how, was easier, at least on the surface. That smoke the chief blew into my face wasn't just smoke. It must have contained something hallucinogenic, something that knocked me out and opened my subconscious like a door. In that blank space between my awareness and my body, I believe they gave me instructions. Orders. And without my normal mind to resist, my body obeyed. I know those are guesses. I know reality could be worse than my explanation. But it's the best shape I've been able to give the horror. The best way to describe how a man can become a tool without knowing he's being used. Now, as I write this, I find myself smiling sometimes, and I hate myself for it. Not because I admire evil, but because I can't deny the careful design of it. The patience, the planning, the way everything was arranged so perfectly that even the truth would sound like madness. If someone ever finds these pages, and if you believe even a small part of what I'm saying, then I need to tell you something. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I helped set in motion, even if I didn't choose it. I'm sorry for my pride in knowing a rare language. I'm sorry for thinking demons and monsters were just stories people told to scare children. I'm sorry for being so sure that the real world doesn't allow things like Baron Waha to exist. It does. This guilt has eaten me for years. It's ruined my sleep, ruined my hunger, ruined my ability to think without feeling sick. I held on only long enough to understand the full picture, because I needed to know what I was apologizing for. Now I do. I don't have strength left to fight what's coming. I can only leave this warning behind and hope someone stronger, smarter, or luckier stops it. I hope, the way people always hope, that good wins in the end. And if it doesn't, if you're reading this in a world that's already starting to tilt toward something darker, then I'm sorry I'm not there with you. I'm sorry I'm leaving you in it. Goodbye, and good luck. The news report played the day they found me. It said Tony Brandon, researcher and one of the founders of the Blue Moon Discovery, had committed suicide. They found him in a bathroom with his throat cut and a bloody piece of glass in his hand. It reminded everyone that he'd been sent to a psychiatric institution after killing a colleague at a party, and that he had been found legally insane. Then, the anchor moved on, because that's what news does. It moves on. In a related segment, they talked about Blue Moon again. They called it one of the most desired flowers in the world, rumored to be the sweetest smelling flower ever discovered. They said it had been found in large quantities 5 years earlier and purchased in bulk by a French multinational company. They said it was finally being released as a perfume, Parfum Blue Moon. They mentioned there had been delays, unforeseen issues, strange deaths, people going insane, but those hurdles were overcome. The release was scheduled for the coming week. Global shipping, $30 a bottle, thousands of pre-orders already. The reporter smiled into the camera and said something like, "Here's hoping we all get to finally experience the rich, captivating fragrance of the ever-elusive Blue Moon. Even here, in this locked place, I swear I can smell it. Not faintly, clearly. As if someone has already opened the bottle somewhere, and the scent is traveling, looking for a body to step into."